From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we're working on for you over the next 60 minutes. There's a new ag secretary in town.
Y'all need to know I was a farmer first.
And he's ready to roll up his sleeves and get to work. The NAFTA battle heats up with dairy on the front lines.
This has been going on for a while, and we're not going to put up with it.
But as trade war talks ease, the president says NAFTA renegotiations need to begin now. A Michigan farmer's laying the foundation for a new venture.
We had about 3,500 head space before, and we'll have 12,000 head space now.
And it's all because of a massive pork processing plant in Michigan. And in John's world,
how long before the next boom times in agriculture? Well, it could be a while.
U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by the dependable, long-lasting Chevy Silverado.
Now for the market-related news. After threats of withdrawing from NAFTA, the U.S. remains a part of the treaty, but urging for a speedier timeline in renegotiating the deal. The NAFTA battle heated up this week after the president threatened to pull out of the 20-year-old treaty. But the White House releasing a statement saying President Trump spoke with both Mexico's president and Canada's prime minister, calling the conversations, quote, pleasant and productive. Now, the president agreed not to terminate NAFTA, but instead to swiftly start on renegotiation. But just the mention of withdrawing from NAFTA set off a flurry of statements from ag groups. American Soybean Association saying, quote, it's a terrible idea, going on to say, quote, it will only mean a longer and more difficult struggle for farmers to recover in this economy, end quote. But some ag groups are in favor of renegotiating the deal.
We'd like it to be renegotiated but treated fairly, whatever that agreement was. I think the agreement was fair when it was originally issued. It just has not been put in place and hasn't been monitored. And so the parties involved haven't been honest with what they were allowed to do. Now,
the latest round of heated arguments stemming from the dairy battle in Wisconsin. Some dairy groups blame failed NAFTA policy for the massive dairy dump impacting 75 producers across Minnesota and Wisconsin. Grassland Dairy sending out letters on April 1st notifying 75 of its customers that they had 30 days to find a new home for their milk. But just days from that deadline, a Wisconsin state official says roughly half of those farms have found a new home, and he's hopeful the remaining will also secure a new market. On Monday, the Commerce Department announcing plans to impose new tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber imports. The department says it's determined that Canada had been improperly subsidizing the sale of softwood lumber products to the United States. Those tariffs could cost Canadian wood companies millions of dollars, and the National Association of Home Builders in the U.S. says it will hike the price of lumber used in building new homes by an average of 6%. Cargill is getting out of the cattle feeding business. Wednesday, the company announced it's selling its beef cattle feed yards in both Kansas and Colorado to Green Plains, which is based in Omaha. Green Plains is also an ethanol producer, but does have feed yards already in both Kansas and Texas. Under the agreement, Green Plains will supply cattle to Cargill, and the reports say Cargill employees will be offered jobs with Green Plains. Well, live cattle prices reaching the highest level in a year, mainly from short covering and stronger cash cattle prices. The April live cattle contract did expire on Friday. Well, a testament to strong demand, USDA showed tighter than expected frozen beef supplies. USDA pointing to a 38 million pound drop in U.S. frozen beef stocks in March, or about 8% reduction. That's the largest one-month decline on record. It's a similar story in pork, with March pork belly stocks hitting the tightest on record. Now, while supplies did edge up slightly from February, the storage numbers are still down 68% from last year. And overall, USDA says frozen pork supplies dropped 3% from last month. Well, cotton prices topping 80 cents this week, much of that from stronger demand. At the current pace, shipments this marketing year could exceed current USDA estimates. All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, we really cooled off across the country this week.
Thanks, Tyne. No doubt about that, and it's going to stay that way, at least in the middle of the country, for much of this coming week. The drought monitor has changed drastically. This is the current one. Now, Florida is still looking kind of bad, central and southern portions, but look what it looked like 4 weeks ago. And as we went through the last 4 weeks, we've just been slowly eating away at the edges of this area of dry weather. And you can see in the southeast, we have scrunched it down into Georgia and Alabama. And there's only one area of extreme drought, no exceptional drought. So it's very unusual. for the lower 48. Let's go day by day then as we head through this week. Here's Monday, a wet system moving through the upper Great Lakes into the northeast. This will have already come through the middle of the country. Some of you folks I know in the Missouri Valley, central Mississippi Valley could have already gotten 10 to 12 inches of rain. So that's just an amazing situation in this storm system moving northeast. Cool all the way down into Texas, dry and mild in the southwest. As we head toward Wednesday then, another system. This is still fairly weak, but it does start to pick up some Gulf moisture, so southern Mississippi Valley could be getting some decent rains by Wednesday. Lingering front in the northeast, otherwise chillier air coming in. And by Friday, that storm system, after going through the southeast, is moving up the mid-Atlantic and into the northeast with some heavy rains there. Colder air coming in behind it, but most of the middle of the country on Friday will be dry. We'll check your longer range forecast in our next half hour.
Thanks, Mike. Well, from trade talks to impressive demand for meats, we'll cover it all during our marketing discussion this week. Tommy Grisafi and Brian Splitt join me next. Welcome back. Well, this weekend on the Marketing Roundtable, we have Brian Splitt and Tommy Grisafi. Let's start off by talking about planting. I mean, Tommy, this weekend, looking at these forecasts, we're expecting a deluge of rain to move across the country, even some snow in the plains. I mean, it's just getting a lot cooler and a lot wetter this weekend.
It's a challenge, and if you read social media, you'd think the world was ending. Yet
Right.
We're in an environment and the price which is going down. On the way here, I noticed a lot of people were doing work. Some customers we have actually quit planting because they were so fearful they were going to plant a corn seed into cold, wet ground, and then it would sit there for a few weeks. So I think people will be surprised when they see the planting progress next week, how much the work was done last week.
So you don't think that possibly this heavy rain, I mean, we're talking multiple inches right in the main part of the Corn Belt, that it could help us have a little pop of price here short term?
It might support things a little bit, but I think when you try to look at it, and I think if we're less than 50% planted, let's say by May 10th, May 15th, then I think the fund managers might think that there could be a drag on yield. But prior to that, I don't know that there's going to be that much concern from the managed money.
All right, and Tommy, I mean, even right now, you mentioned planting, corn planting 17%. That's 11 points behind last year, but really not lagging that 5-year average by much. But soybean planting, we're pretty much right on track right now. I mean, we're pretty close. So you don't have any concerns with late planting yet either?
No, not at all. And as a trader and a speculator, several times in my career I bet against the American farmer, and every time I did it, I lost. So I have yet to win. You may see the market go up, but then it loses it all in a few days. And so I have yet to profit from betting that the American farmer won't get the crop planted.
At the same time, we look at this drought monitor, we're at a record low. 6% of the country is suffering from some type of drought. I mean, we just do not have a lot of dryness out there. A little bit different situation this year than last year, Brian.
Right, we don't have that narrative of the impending drought that is supposed to happen. Now, we have the lowest amount of drought in the country on record since we started keeping records in 2000 as far as that goes. And that's going to be one more piece of the bearish pie, but that doesn't mean that something can't happen during the summer growing season. And if we've learned anything from the futures markets as a student of the market, things change, and they can change rather rapidly.
Not only did we have that underlying drought factor last year, but we also received some support last year on prices due to the safrinha corn crop down in South America, seeing that was really suffering, and that added fuel to the bullish story last year. So it just seems like we're in a lot different of a situation right now, Tommy.
It feels like that. As we spoke, I talked to Brian Bastian last night, and he knows the South American numbers a lot better. So all of America is focusing on what's going on in our backyard and our neighbors and what we're seeing. And you're forgetting that they just grew a huge crop in South America. And our very reason to rally markets last year, as you said, was that a crop production failure happened in several ways. And so the American farmer is starting to forget that they're growing a record crop in South America. So they've tried to ruin that crop. They couldn't do it mentally. So now they're trying to ruin our crop. Whereas really the thing we should be talking about is the world's dealing with a lot of bushels. Yeah. What's the plan?
And those bushels continue to grow. I mean, just when we think the South American crop cannot get any bigger, Brian, we come out and we see new forecasts on that crop that's even larger than what we expected.
Right, the soybean crop continued to grow, and I think on the back end of their production season, we probably added maybe 5 to 7 million tons of soybeans. Now that might long-term end up being too much, and we'll see how things pan out over the next several months. But all this is going to lead to where the funds are short, they're going to add to shorts. We're going to have near record or record short positions going into the growing season. So I still think that leaves a good setup for what we've seen the last several years, which is a very quick and very short-lived rally, but still an opportunity to use.
You do think there will still be an opportunity?
I do.
He mentioned the funds and how they're record short. What should a producer's plan be right now? I mean, we just continue to have this bearish news piled on these grains and the corn and the soybean market. What can you do at this point?
Well, you have to ask yourself where you are in your own personal marketing cycle. Do you have a lot of 16 crop? If you're still talking about 15 crop and 14 wheat, you might have a problem. If all your 16 crops moved, you could see a scenario where you might want to have some ownership of that through some calls. Most of the people we're dealing with still have a lot of physical bushels they own. So my biggest fear is seeing a huge second harvest in July, where we know that South America now grew the big crop. The American farmer tried to hoard grain as long as they could, catch that carry. They've now have to sell that market to make room for the new crop. To me, that's at what price that happens, we will have another harvest here this summer.
Well, even talks of NAFTA are moving the markets. Plus, we saw some impressive action in the cattle market this week. We'll talk about all of that when we come back on U.S. Farm Report. Welcome back. Well, if you watched the news earlier in the show, you heard a lot of talk about NAFTA and threatens to pull out of NAFTA, but now we're planning on renegotiating that. Even the talk of pulling out of NAFTA had an impact on our markets, Brian.
Right, and almost immediately. I don't know what the eventual outcome is going to be, whether it's going to be renegotiated, whether they're going to pull out of NAFTA, but what I do know is that the market was feeling good. We were rallying corn, and when the news of NAFTA hit, you combine that with a little bit drier forecast, and the price of corn drops 10 cents in a couple days. So if there's one thing that I've realized is that NAFTA and any communications from the administration regarding stuff like this is going to move the market. And if you don't want to have that, your crop at risk, then you need to have some protection under it.
And what do you suggest at this point?
There's options you can have that are 30 days out. They should be relatively cheap. An at-the-money option might be 5 to 6 cents just to have something here for the next 30 days. I don't think that's a horrible thing to do.
Well, it's a different story in livestock. When we look at the cattle prices this week, just seeing some impressive gains. Friday we were lower and then we turned higher all of a sudden. Really, what caused that switch on Friday in the cattle futures?
The cash market, which is what rules any, nobody sells their cattle. I've been to LaSalle Street a lot of times. I've never seen many animals walking down the street or farmers delivering grain. So the cash market went bid. And there was a big announcement this afternoon just while we were driving here that they would pay a higher price than most thought, than the day before. So the cash market's absolutely on fire. And there's different reasons for that. And Brian wanted to, brought up some weights, and there's just different things. For as bad as the scenario looked when we're trading 95-cent fats a few months ago, they're going limit up, and it's amazing how people are having a hard time managing the risk in what should be a dream market, something you're long going up.
Brian, are there any signs that this market will continue to go higher? When you look at the June contract, is that telling us that this market isn't topping out?
Well, we have some cash commitments higher than where the futures are trading right now, and the electronic cattle market had traded 125 for delivery 17 to 30 days out in the Fed Cattle Exchange earlier in the week. Like you were saying, we heard some news on the way out here that the cash might be even higher than that. So until the cash market calms down, it's hard to imagine that the market's going to top. But from an open interest perspective, you have cattle in June has 1/4 the open interest of what July corn has. Yet from the fund position, it's a similar size. So one thing I would say is be very careful, because if the fund money wants out of this market, the door is not big enough.
And why do weights concern you at this point?
Weights have been running below the last several years, so that's part of the bullish story right now. But to look at that, seasonally, the weights will be bottoming out, probably in late May, early June. And if that's the case, that could be also help add to the timing of maybe reaching a high sometime here in the next month or so.
Tommy, you mentioned producers are having a hard time managing this risk. What advice would you give to them in the current conditions that we're seeing right now in this cattle market?
The biggest short-sightedness of any market that starts to go up when you didn't think it can go up is that shame on you that you thought you knew where markets were going, right? And so over time in history, what messes people up. Producers are used to a down market. It seems throughout your whole life you're dealing with low prices. Where I've seen people get hurt and experts get it wrong is in these big up markets, whether it be the big up market of the beans that nobody knew was going to happen or what happened in the cattle the last few weeks. So we like options. They're not for everyone. I know cattle guys like futures. They don't feel like they're getting their money out of the options, but I'll tell you what, you'll get your money out of the futures. If you sell a future at 125 in the fat cattle or the feeder cattle and they're at 145, you really lost $20. They'll go tick for tick. So people don't feel like they're getting a true hedge with the options, and when you do the futures you have unlimited margin calls and it becomes very scary.
Brian, real quick, what's the biggest risk in this cattle market?
I think it's the size of the fund position right now, and just the you compare the fund size to the open interest in the market, and it's not like corn, which is extremely liquid. So 150,000 contracts moves that market a lot more.
All right, well, it's already time to get their closing thoughts. Let's take a break and then we'll be back on U.S. Farm Report. Welcome back. Well, it's time now to get closing thoughts. Brian, we'll start with you.
So just keeping an eye on what's coming down the pipeline. We're going to have a report from the USDA in May. That is going to be the very first new crop carryout estimate. I think that information could cause another leg down in the soybean market, potentially testing $9. The new crop corn contract, something I'm watching the last several years prior to a summer rally. We've bottomed out around 365, so that might suggest maybe another 15 to 20 cents of downside there. If that's going to bother you, have some coverage. If you can manage that storm, then live through it and see if we can get a good rally for summer.
All right, thanks. Tommy?
A couple things I'm looking at. If we want to talk a weather market, we truly have a little weather market happening in the spring wheat up in Dakotas. Watch that we're going at record low spring wheat acres. Watch that people abandon even more of those acres and switch it to something or corn or beans. Also, as Brian said earlier in the show, these cattle in this record longs, as we said, these funds get in these markets, and when they go out, it could lead to a stampede, and that could be ugly. One last thing is, what's your plan for 2016 corn? We know you have it, and the market knows you have it, and you're going to need a plan to get out of that 16 so you can make room for 17.
All right, thank you both. John Phipps joins us next.
Well, higher crop prices also producing costly farm inputs. John Phipps has more in this week's John's World.
Okay, this won't be news to many of you, but as I was spraying herbicides on our corn, I came face to face with the skyrocketing expense this now represents. Because of resistant weeds, we are applying a residual pre-emergent herbicide as well as using glyphosate later when the corn is taller. And the same type of program is necessary for soybeans too, just different chemicals. Now, I'm fighting the urge here to whine about candy bars that cost a nickel like old guys do, but this escalating expense reinforced for me what a remarkable period of profit grain farmers enjoyed just a decade ago. While we think back wistfully to $6 and $7 corn and $15 beans, the other astonishing factor was that was when glyphosate worked 100% of the time, and it had gone off patent, so it was dirt cheap. Herbicide costs were the lowest of my career, often less than $10 an acre. I remember a friend griping how the custom spraying fee was more than the materials costs. Seed costs were rising, but still, they were proportionally far from the prices that we're looking at today. And cash rents seemed sky high at the time, but in retrospect, they were actually a bargain. My point is not simple nostalgia for incredible profit margins, but the sobering reality that it will be hard to duplicate that matchup of stable or even declining costs and surprising crop prices. Strong demand may help grain prices in the future, but the odds of it occurring simultaneously with technology-driven input cost decline are vanishingly small. The boom times of 2008 through 13 eclipsed the previous high water mark for farm income nearly a century earlier in 1914 and the following years. If this 100-year interval is indicative, we were all dang lucky to be around for those halcyon years. And no matter how old you are, the chance that you will see a repeat in your lifetime could be a tad optimistic.
Thanks, John. Still to come, the newly sworn-in Ag Secretary is rolling up his sleeves, getting to work. Plus, many in the pork industry in high anticipation of a couple pork processing plants coming online this year. Coming up, we get an exclusive tour of one of the largest, and it's the technology that's cutting edge.
Bacon. Give me bacon. It's not just
From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. We have much more ahead. The newly confirmed Ag Secretary says he's rolling up his sleeves and getting to work. A massive pork processing plant in Coldwater, Michigan is creating an opportunity for producers to expand. We have a behind-the-scenes look. And John Phipps answers a question about a privacy power grab. Now for the headlines, the wait is over for a new leader at USDA. Former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue sworn in as the 31st Secretary of Agriculture this week.
I've been waiting to see y'all, and it looks like y'all been waiting to see me too, right?
The newly appointed secretary making some lighthearted remarks to USDA staff this week.
Y'all need to know I was a farmer first, and we're going to get comfortable in working clothes, okay?
But the secretary promising to get right to work, setting a lofty goal for the agency.
This job at USDA is about work, right? It's about getting stuff done because we got a lot of people depending on us. And that's what the point I want to make today is that as a department, my vision for the Department of Agriculture in the United States of America is to be the best run, the best managed, the best regarded agency in this country with the best reputation. Can we do that? I believe we can.
Secretary Perdue getting down to business immediately this week, sitting at a table alongside President Donald Trump as the president signed an executive order for agriculture.
Today, America's farmers feed not only our nation, but millions of people around the world. And we're going to open that up much more for you folks.
Titled Promoting Agriculture and Rural Prosperity in America, the president says the executive order will empower Perdue to identify and eliminate unnecessary regulations that hurt farmers and rural communities. The president also assured dairy farmers in Wisconsin and New York that they'll open up trade doors.
The dairy farmers up in Wisconsin, upstate New York, different places, a lot of border states in particular, are not able to sell their dairy products into Canada. And this has been going on for a while, and we're not going to put up with it.
Prior to signing the order, the president met with a 14-person farmer roundtable panel discussing issues important to them. The estate tax could be a thing of the past. That's if the president has his way. This week, the president releasing his tax plan. Not only would it eliminate what's referred to as the death tax, but it would also cut the tax rate for owner-operator businesses and corporations to 15%. The president's plan would also limit the capital gains tax rate at 20%. The Treasury Secretary saying, quote, "Our objective is to make U.S. businesses the most competitive in the world," end quote. Now, those on the left side of the aisle voicing strong opposition to the plan. That's it for the news. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with the national forecast and even a glimpse at the 90-day. Mike?
Thanks, Tyne. Let's get right to it. You can see a pretty big trough as we head through the latter parts of this weekend anyway for the middle of the country, and that's moving on up through the Great Lakes and into the Northeast, and that will be spreading some huge amounts of rain. It's already going on in the middle of the country, but that will spread it off to the northeast. By Wednesday, then, a chillier shot of air coming in behind it. Watch what happens. Another trough intensifies through the middle of the country by the end of the week, and that will be spreading some rain up and down the East Coast by Friday and into this coming weekend, and yet another trough kind of digging into the northern Rockies as we head towards Sunday. So kind of a volatile weather pattern setting up here over the next week. Let's go for our 90-day outlook. May temperatures below normal, northern plains, above normal, mid-Atlantic, southeast into the southwest. June temperatures above normal for most areas east of the Mississippi Valley and parts of the northern plains, below normal Montana northward, and July temperatures above normal Great Lakes, East Coast, and the west. No below normal areas. Precipitation, this is always tough, but I'm going above normal from the northern Rockies to the Great Lakes and above normal southeast into eastern Texas. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, talks of pulling out of NAFTA also sending ripples through the pork industry. The pork industry seeing impressive demand so far this year, with February shipments to Mexico up 22%. But the U.S. pork industry is still in expansion mode, partially enticed by new processing plants coming online. In this Farm Journal report, we get an exclusive tour of what could be one of the largest pork processing plants in the country. Located in Coldwater, Michigan, it's creating a big opportunity for producers in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio to expand. Clemens Food Group told me the plant is already set up to handle a second shift, or the 22,000 head. All they need to add is additional cooler space. All right, up next, John Phibbs.
Was it a power grab or a giveaway?
Well, we had quite a few viewer questions and comments after John showed off his new coffee mug. Here with one of those comments is John Phibbs.
David Brethold from Louisville, Kentucky has a different view on the actions by the Federal Communications Commission and Congress on internet privacy. Recently, you discussed data security, the cloud, and Congress cancellation of the requirement that ISPs ask permission to collect personal information. As you well know, the rule had nothing to do with data and security and cloud storage. It was a power grab by the liberal head of the FCC from the FTC. The FTC had brought enforcement actions in the past. Interestingly, Google and Amazon were exempted from the rule, possibly due to their close association with the Obama administration. Well, thank you for your comments, David, and for including your address. I wish more people would. Power grab has become the useful word we use to describe any government action that we disagree with. The ruling and subsequent law was indeed about internet privacy because it allows internet providers like Verizon or Comcast to harvest and sell your browsing history to advertisers. If any power was grabbed, it was by internet providers. The reason Google had been allowed to do this was that if you're using their browser, permission is one of those lines in the voluminous "Do you agree" statement you sign off on to download their software. This applies to all other browsers like Internet Explorer, Safari, or Chrome. Similarly, sites like Amazon can also harvest your data because you choose to go to their website and they can see what you're doing. The change is the FCC was going to classify the Internet a common carrier like TV frequencies and regulate it. The logic for this different treatment was while you can choose your browser or what websites you visit, it's much harder to change your internet provider. This remains controversial, and the reversal of the previous decision is a big win for carriers. My view is the conservative position on this issue would be to favor individual rights and privacy rather than to add to the number of eyes watching your internet activity. That said, since I spoke about this, an entire industry has sprung up to help anyone protect their browsing habits from scrutiny. You can use something called a virtual private network, or VPN, which is easier than it sounds, or browsers like Opera or Tor are available to safeguard your data. Regardless, like most technological disputes, my bet is somebody is going to make billions selling a solution to people who want to keep their information private, making this political bickering largely pointless.
Thanks, John. And remember, if you have a question or comment, just email John at mailbag@usfarmreport.com, or you can also shoot us a note on Facebook or Twitter. When we come back, it's time for a trip out west to visit Baxter Black. Welcome back. Well, it's time now to take a trip out west to visit Baxter Black.
You know, it takes a lot of jobs on a ranch to keep it running smooth. The cowboys are in the spotlight in real life, just like they are in the movies, unless the boss is around. The rancher and his daughter often have good parts. The mechanic who makes sure the haying equipment, the trucks, tractors, and assorted motors are maintained and fixed gets a little publicity. Even the cook gets to say a few lines. But who greases the windmills and keeps the garden and feeds the cat and drives the oldest pickup and generally does what nobody else wants to do? When they put him on the payroll, all the cowboys wondered why. Because he didn't own a saddle, couldn't rope and didn't try. So they gave him all the bad jobs, the one that they'd put off, and went about their business, leaving him to clean the trough and irrigate and fix the fence and chop the thistle down. And when they all ran out of beer, it was him that went to town. He handled all the details the cowboys would ignore that held the place together, kept the wolves back from the door, And they only saw him now and then at night when they'd come in, because things were running awful smooth and they were busy men. Well, nobody ever noticed that he always did his part until the day the windmill froze and the pickup wouldn't start, and the coyotes got the chickens, and the butane tank went dry, the milk cow tore the barn down, and the mechanic's wife got high. Nobody stoked the wood stove or started up a fire. So the cook refused them breakfast and threatened to retire. The dogs tore up the smokehouse like they'd hit it with a bomb, and the ranch ground to a standstill. And the cowboys said, "Where's Tom?" Seems they'd really never thought about how much they'd miss his face. Finally hit them on the day the hired man quit the place. This is Baxter Black from out there.
You can hear more of Baxter's humor online at baxterblack.com. When we come back, Machinery Pete has this week's Tractor Tales, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're off to the Lone Star State to learn about a workhorse from the International family. This International Harvester 1468 had all the comforts you needed back in the early 1970s. Bob Stone was proud of his red and white giant and wasn't afraid to open it up on his farm.
Thanks so much. Well, don't forget there are folks in ag and rural communities of Kansas that really need our help, and you can do so through a new effort. It's called the $1 Million Wildfire Relief Fund, and it's being backed by the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, and that will go help rebuild more than 18,000 miles of fencing destroyed this spring. Learn more about how you can help at wildfirerelieffund.org. Stay with us. We have From the Farm photos next. Welcome back. Well, Mike, it's been a busy planting week for some. And for one of our analysts, Jared Creed, he and his wife Cassie welcomed their little girl, JC, into the world a couple months ago. She's already getting her first tractor ride. Look at that blonde hair. I'm just amazed by that. She's too cute. Thanks for sharing, Jared.
No doubt. Not ideal planting conditions for putting in sugar beets this year.
In North Dakota, yeah.
As you can see, snow is lightly coating the ground there.
Yeah, it's just been so cold in some areas.
Yeah,
with
it really
even some
has.
Snow and some frost and freeze warnings in some areas.
Other places just been too wet.
Exactly, yeah. And Mike, I was in Michigan this week. The wheat crop is so lush and green. It's healthy despite the lack of snowpack that they saw in the thumb of Michigan this year. You know, they were just talking about how mild of a winter it's been, and it has been. That's been the case for some of our viewers.
It has, and they grow a lot of sugar beets up there in the thumb of Michigan.
That they
too.
do.
Yeah.
This colder weather, though, you know, are you seeing any more cold snaps in our future, or do you think we get this behind us and we're
Northern Plains, you still have that possibility even into the Great Lakes for a frost or freeze, and so that is always a concern. But I do think we go into a warmer pattern, especially in the southeastern portions of the country. But
All right.
The 90-day forecast will be showing.
Yeah, all right. Thanks so much, Mike. Well, for all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us again right here next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.